As the entire world was focusing on Russia and Wagner, we tend to forget that Wagner played a major role within Africa. The countries you see highlighted in red is actually from the Wagner website, and they boast how they have 3,000 members in Mali, 1,000 members in Algeria, so join Wagner today and go fight in Africa. But the issue is, now that Wagner might not be a thing anymore, what's going to happen to these African countries? Now, before I start this video, you need to understand this. I've always been very critical of Wagner in Africa. I do not think they are the good guys in Africa, but I do think they are very, very good at their job in Africa, and I will explain. So let's get to this video. Okay, so the first thing you need to know is that Wagner is a business. They are a private military company, and I know a lot of you know this, but I know a lot of you are new to the party. So the way Wagner essentially makes money in Africa is that they go to these war-torn countries, and they essentially represent Russia. They're like their ambassadorship. So if Wagner works with your country, you now have a direct link to Mother Russia. And we all know Russia is the second best superpower in the world. And plus, you don't want to work with the United States. You want to work with Russia. So the way things work is that Wagner will protect your gold mines, but you need to give us like 10% of your cut from the gold mine. But we promise that we will defend your country to the last man. You will have no issues within your country. Just give us some of your gold. Oh, and guess what? We will give you some AK-47s because, again, we are connected to the Kremlin. Oh, and guess what? We will also train up your militaries. That is how Wagner operates within Africa, and that's why they've actually been very successful within Africa in being an ambassadorship for Russia. Now that you understand the context of how Wagner operates, and probably you are starting to see why this is not a good thing that Wagner might be falling apart and there's no replacement of power or security, essentially all of these countries are at risk of Wagner not being there anymore, and now maybe an extremist group might take over. Now there might be a coup within the government because, again, these Wagner troops are loyal to these particular governments. And these Wagner private militaries within these countries, they also help train up the local police forces. They train up the local special forces, the security forces who also protect these governments to not be overthrown. That is a major standard operating procedure that Wagner does when they go into these countries. Again, Wagner is a highly trained force. When we were looking at reports of Russia and Wagner going into Russia and Wagner almost takes over Russia, it was almost comical that people were treating Wagner as this local militia group who all of a sudden wants to do an uprising. I don't think people realize that a lot of Wagner have had combat operation experience within Africa, within Syria. A lot of them are combat vets. A lot of them were prior Spetsnaz. And Wagner also trains special operations group and regular military forces for the Russians. So these guys know exactly what they're doing. They're also really good at psychological operations. So what they're really good at is ensuring that countries do not fall apart when Wagner is around. Again, I am not saying this is a good thing because we will get to the bad that Wagner does in these countries and how it actually affects the United States in a big way. Okay, so Mali is a great case study as to how Wagner operates within Africa. As most of you may know, or most of you may not know, Mali completely fell apart to extremist groups because the French couldn't handle Mali. And because of this, Wagner saw this as a great time to go into Mali and then work with the Mali government. So Wagner did a really good job of pushing out local militia groups who were trying to go against the Mali government, but they were also really good at pushing out random civilians who had nothing to do with any of this conflict. This is because Wagner will take out your water supply, they will take out your electric supply, they will cut your internet, they will take down your local cell phone tower if you have one. They will do whatever it takes to make it impossible for you to operate in an area, but because of that, they push everyone out of Mali into territories where the United States is operating out of. Now again, I am not saying Wagner are the good guys, I am saying they're really good at their job, because they are making Mali more secure, but they're also just pushing everyone out. Whether you're good or bad, just get out of our face if you're in our way. So they're pushing people into Niger, they're pushing people into Nigeria, and this is where the US Special Forces have a very strong presence within Africa, and where they want to essentially help these countries and to persuade these countries to have the United States way of living. So again, let me explain this. US Special Forces forces within Africa have been around for a long time, but things only got quite noisy when U.S. Special Forces had some failed operations and some bad leadership who put them in bad situations. But nonetheless, U.S. Special Forces have been sort of operating under the radar, that is until Wagner got to Africa. And because Wagner is pushing everyone into nations and countries where the U.S. Special Forces are working, it makes it look like the U.S. Special Forces have zero influence or zero power within these countries because, hey, I thought the U.S. Special Forces were supposed to be the greatest fighting force in the world. Why are all these people coming into our country? Now we have to fight these people. You guys should be helping us. So essentially what I'm trying to say is U.S. Special Forces are suffering because Wagner are pushing all the bad guys into these territories, and it was never supposed to be like that. Nonetheless, though, because Wagner's not going to be a thing anymore, what's going to happen? What's even more crazy is that Wagner has such an influence on these African populations is that these are the faces of African fighters who actually volunteered to go fight for the Russian forces up in Ukraine. I mean, who knows what these guys are promised? I'm just speculating that these guys were going to be promised ultimate wealth. They were going to be promised that these guys are going to be heroes. But again, it is sad to see that these men who have nothing to do with Russia-Ukraine, they lost their families and lives to go fight in Ukraine. What's even more crazy is that the head of Wagner was essentially playing psychological warfare with Mr. Blinken of the United States. Prigozhin, head of Wagner, or former head of Wagner, actually sent a letter to the United States and talked about potentially either working together or just getting out of our way and sending us money because the U.S. military clearly is bad at their job. So for those of you who are new to the party, Mr. Prigozhin is really good at psyops and he's really good at making people look bad. And let me just highlight some of these notes of the letter so you can see what I'm talking about. Back in 2017 through 18, when me and the Wagner PMC started actively operating in Africa, we managed to achieve great results in establishing security and order in every country we have been present in. Therefore, I invite you to support Wagner PMC's efforts in ensuring safety and security in Africa by sponsoring a new project named Wagner, Safe Africa, WSA, in which you can invest, thereby saving American taxpayer money. Again, as I talked about at the beginning of the video, they are playing into this notion that the U.S. is not doing well in Africa. But again, this is because the U.S. Special Forces have really managed to lay low under the radar, as along with drone operations in Africa. So it's funny that Prigozhin knew to play into this, and he knew that it would make the U.S. military look bad. Third paragraph, since most Africans do not trust the policies of France and the United States, and their trust ratings are very low, I suggest that you abandon the attempt to exert political influence in Africa and focus solely on the security that the Wagner PMC can provide. The only part that was left out is how Wagner really follows no rules, and they essentially can do whatever they want. So that's why obviously nothing ever came about this. A lot of people didn't even hear about this letter because I think the United States didn't even know if this is legit, or they just threw it straight to the shredder. So this is essentially what's going on, is that these African nations might be losing one of their strongest ally/security forces that protected their country. Now, to be fair, Wagner never officially operated under Wagner in these countries. They just operated under nothing. They were just security forces. But again, we have evidence such as that letter that Prigozhin was in Wagner. We don't know the official numbers. We don't know if we can trust these numbers since they came out of Russia. But nonetheless, I know a lot of people are saying, well, this is great for Africa because now these people will leave Africa. But unfortunately for Africa, there's a lot of division and separation going on, which is a really bad thing. I always feel bad for these African nations because they think they're getting something good out of working with Russia, but clearly things are going bad. I highly suggest a lot of you do your own independent research and look into Mali, look into Sudan, look into Algeria, all these countries where wherever Wagner operates, there seems to be a lot of bad that comes with them. And as far as U.S. Special Forces operating in Africa, this is actually a good thing for them, but it could also be a bad thing because now we don't know what's going to happen, and the United States might be sucked into a vacuum and having some conflict within Africa. So we'll see what happens. We need to pray for Africa. We need to keep our eyes on Africa and these countries. And this is the video. My name is T-SPLY. Leave your comments and opinions down below. We'll see you later.